So you just have to go through each day, and if it's so low that you can't make serving size adjustments, you may have to add some food. So go in your textbook and look in the, for example, vitamin D column or chapter, and look at the fat soluble vitamins, vitamin D, and look and see what's there, where high sources are, and just add those to your diet study, and then make sure your average meets that goal. As far as sodium, I want you to be below 100% because of hypertension. So even if you're 101%, I want you to reduce your sodium intake below 100%. So if you look on your 3-day average bar graph sheet, you'll notice at the bottom there I've highlighted that my intake there was like 2,900. The goal is 13, so I had over 200% of my sodium intake. So what I'm going to have to do then is go through each day and make some subtractions of some high sodium foods so that I get down to my goal of 1,300 milligrams. As far as fiber, your goal is to look at and make sure that you're above the 75% goal. If you're below 75% intake, then you're going to have to raise your fiber intake. So you can find that on the top part of your 3-day average, and you'll notice that I'm at 101%, so I meet that goal. But you'll probably won't be surprised that most of you are going to be below 50%, because fiber is not one of those things in our diets that we get a lot of. So you're probably going to find yourself raising your fiber intake quite a bit, actually. So what you'll need to do is, first of all, you're going to be looking at your DRI goal. So my goal is 30 grams. So you're going to take that 30 grams, and what you're going to do is you're going to determine how much insoluble, how much soluble fiber you need. So the rule of thumb is a 3-to-1 ratio, insoluble to soluble fiber. So if you take 75% or 0.75 times the 30 gram goal, you'd get 22.5 grams of insoluble, and then the 25% would be 7.5 grams. So you're going to have to make adjustments probably to get that ratio. So the first thing you need to do is determine where you're at right now. So in your spreadsheet, what you're going to be looking for is, for our criteria for this paper is that foods that are high in soluble fibers are going to be fruits, oats like oatmeal, and legumes, which are beans like black beans and pinto beans and navy beans and chili beans and those kinds of things. So anytime you see those foods, we're going to consider those water soluble. And then vegetables, wheat grains, whole wheat bread, those kinds of things would be insoluble. The other grains would be like rice, rye, anything else that would be in the grain family. So you're going to be looking for those. So if we look at your spreadsheet, what you'll notice is that you have a column for dietary fiber. And what you're going to have to do is physically go through that and determine how much soluble and how much insoluble you have. So for example, I have circled oatmeal, I have circled orange juice, which would be fruit, and apple, which is fruit. All of those are soluble. I've determined that there's 10.81 grams of soluble. So if you just subtract that, or I rounded that up to 11, you subtract that from the total, and you get 16 grams of insoluble. Well, that's not a 3-to-1 ratio, as you notice. So if you do that for each day, and then add those days together, divide by 3, get an average, you're going to find probably that you're not at the 3-to-1 ratio. So you're going to have to make adjustments to meet that ratio. So what you do is just go into your spreadsheet and change serving sizes to increase, decrease, because your goal is going to be able to meet the 22.5 grams of insoluble and the 7.5 grams of soluble in order to meet that 3-to-1 ratio. So you're going to probably have to make some adjustments to that. And then once again, the way you'd write that up is the same as we went over with the complex carbohydrates, where you're going to have day 1, my intake, present intake is this much. I'll make these changes. We'll add, if it's insoluble, I add 2 pieces of whole wheat bread. and that's going to be, you know, 10 grams of fiber, insoluble fiber. So my new intake is going to be whatever it is, 10 more grams than what you take, and then add those up. Do that for day 1, day 2, day 3. Add them up, divide by 3, get an average, and your goal is for insoluble 22.5. As far as your summary at the end of your paper, it's just basically what did you learn from your diet. What are some adjustments you might make? What are things you might do in the future to meet your goals? And then go from there. What I don't want you to do, and one thing that I need to mention at the very end, is as we're going through this, it would be very difficult for you to balance your diet. If you tried to balance your diet, we'd be here till next year trying to figure that out, because as you know, every time you make one change, you're going to change every single nutrient. So our goal is to look at each nutrient separately. So for example, saturated fatty acids, what you'd do is just isolate that by itself, make your adjustments to meet the goal, and then go to monounsaturates and just act like you didn't do anything. And don't be surprised if you may use the same food and actually reduce it to reduce your monounsaturates, and you'd had used that food and raised it for saturated, because they're in both things are in the food. So it can drive you crazy if you try to balance everything out and say, oh, I don't want to change that because that'll change everything else. So don't do that, but just isolate every nutrient by itself, make the goal adjustments, and then start over with the next nutrient like you didn't do anything. Our main goal is that you're going to be able to relate nutrients and food, so that from now on you'll know what foods you eat that are high in saturated fats. You'll know what foods you eat that are high in monos or low in monos, and what you need to do to increase those. What things are high in fiber and what things are low in fiber, which ones have insoluble, soluble. So that's our goal, is just to kind of force you to look at your diet intake a little bit closer, and then come out of it understanding that when you look at a plate of food, you have a good idea of what kind of nutrients you're eating, and then you can go from there. So the summary is not too difficult. Just give me a little synopsis of what you learned, and we'll go from there. So hopefully this helps. If not, email me and ask me some questions, and I'll do the best I can to help you. Thanks.